Kevin Durso covers the Flyers for 97.3 ESPN.com. Joining us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. I got to get some insights from the Flyers. I know the trade deadline is a month away, but I don't know what to do with this hockey team right now. It absolutely perplexes me on what exactly they're doing. And Kevin, is it fair for me to say this, but are the Flyers still figuring out what they want to do with this hockey team too?
They are quite possibly trying to figure this out. I mean, I would like to believe that Chuck Fletcher doesn't need to see anything else to make up his mind at this point. There's not really – you're going to see Claude Giroux talking about at the All-Star break and things like that, talking about they think they can go on a run and that they think that they've still got an outside shot to make the playoffs, and if they can come together and go on a run, they could still make the playoffs. It just seems it's almost impossible for something like that to happen at this stage of the season. You would need to have an incredible 2.5 months to make that happen in the last 35 games or so here. And it's just not going to happen. So if management is keen to the situation, you have to start looking at what you're going to do over the course of the next month. The trade deadline will be here, and there's opportunity for players to be moved. I do think Chuck Fletcher has the right idea when he talked about Wayne Simmons, because he did indicate that a decision on Wayne Simmons is going to come in the next month. Either they will have re-signed him and he'll stick with the Flyers beyond this season, or if it's not looking like that's going anywhere, then they're probably going to trade him and get something for him before they lose him for nothing via free agency. So that kind of mindset tells me that they are probably more leaning towards being that cellar team, just because it's hard to climb out of the cellar of the NHL at this stage of the season. Usually even Thanksgiving is a great time for kind of evaluating the standings and seeing where you are, and that usually is an indicator of where you're going to be at the end of the season. For the Flyers to be where they are right now and to think that they would have a shot to make the playoffs out of that, I just don't see it. So if I'm in their shoes, I'm thinking about next year and beyond and what I can do to make this team better in the future, and the tough decisions that are going to come as a result of that.
Among those tough decisions, in my mind, has to involve the big names on this team. You mentioned Giroux, but he's got the no trade deal. Voracek's a guy who's been mentioned. You mentioned Wayne Simmons. I don't want to sound like an extremist, but I'm kind of at the point, Kevin, where I look at this team and I feel like this team has gone as far as it can. I think that unless the player's name is Carter Hart, Sean Couturier, JVR, Travis Konechny, and Provorov, to me, it's open season on all these guys.
And I can see the merit for that. I certainly think the core needs some shaking up in a big way. I don't think anything would happen to Claude Giroux just because he's the most consistent of the core still, even after all of this time. And in these seasons where the team hasn't performed as well, he's still performed fairly consistently, and he's an all-star this season for a reason. He's led the team in points. He's been more consistent than any other forward that the team has had, and that stands out. I do think that keeping a guy like Giroux around also benefits you moving forward, because he'll be that veteran presence, and it's not something where he has to be the top-line guy forever. Someone's going to have to come in somewhere down the road and step up and become the top-line guy eventually. That's probably what their hopes are for somebody like Nolan Patrick. He's 20 years old. If he can get that confidence up and keep playing the way that he did last week and keep building that confidence, he's got the potential to be a top-line guy, and maybe he jumps into where Giroux is now, and Giroux becomes more of a depth forward, and that's a great thing to keep in your back pocket on a second or third line down the road. But other guys, I don't see the merit in trying to keep around as much. Jake Voracek's got a bit of a complicated contract as well. It's very long-term. He's got, I believe, a partial no-trade clause. It's very complicated in his case. But Wayne Simmons, it's not very complicated. And look, Wayne Simmons is a fan favorite. Claude Giroux called him one of those heart and soul guys, and all of that's very true. But if you're not really going anywhere this particular season, and kind of the idea for the future, especially with a new GM, is going to be shaping this team into what he thinks the team should be, not necessarily what anybody else thought. I think when Ron Hextall was here, the goal was probably to find a way to keep Wayne Simmons around in some capacity. I think now that Chuck Fletcher's here, while everybody in the league has an idea of what Wayne Simmons means to a team, I don't think his future here is looking very good at this point, or very likely. I think that he's one of those guys that you almost have to move out, because he's probably the most valuable player that you have in terms of a trade chip and in getting some form of a return. So he's probably one of those guys that would move out. And I do agree with you. I do think a lot of the other players down the line are open season to an extent. I think that Shane Gostisbehere is a very intriguing name. Sometimes you've got to move a guy who's younger and has that value to get another player who's going to be that up-and-coming player and take his place, or be somebody else. Maybe it's a forward who jumps in. But, yeah, and I don't know that that's going to be the best move for them, but Shane Gostisbehere is not having the best season this year after a career year last year. Maybe a change of scenery would do something for him. Who knows? You start thinking about all the possibilities. They're not going to be able to completely clean house here, but there's a lot of names that'll be floated around. And I do think that Chuck Fletcher started a little bit on the right foot in a sense, because when you look at somebody like Jordan Wheel, it was a very minor trade. They didn't get much of a return, but that was a guy with an expiring contract. And if you weren't going to keep him around beyond this year, then you've got to trade a player like that just to get something for him if he has no future. So Chuck Fletcher made the right decision there and got something, even if it's just a sixth-round pick and a really deep minor league prospect that you'll probably never hear much from. It's still getting something out of it that could turn into, a draft pick can turn into anybody. A sixth-round pick could end up being a future star. You never know. It's more of a long shot, obviously, but that's still the right idea, getting assets back that you may be able to use down the road. Maybe it allows you to trade a different draft pick later on to get somebody in the offseason. You start playing with those kind of assets as everything moves on. So that's the right idea.
Right, and also, Kevin, it's the fact that hockey is a little more like baseball when it comes to the draft and with prospects, because these guys, they go to the AHL, they go through the systems, and there are a lot of times that guys get drafted later. You think about some of the guys who've even been just in Philadelphia, over the years. Some of the guys that were productive in Philadelphia, they were 4th, 5th, 6th round picks, kind of like baseball, in the fact that, they weren't talked about in the draft, but they developed into really good players. So that's a good point about the fact that, it's about getting something in return for some of these guys. I know that, so I assume Dale Weiss is getting traded soon as well, right? Because they told him to stay home?
Yeah, that situation is really kind of strange, just because I don't really know of anybody who's told a player before, don't even bother getting on the team plane to go on this road trip, this one game that they had in Montreal. Don't even bother. Just stay home and kind of await your fate. And I think it's also very interesting and a little telling that there was no news this week about the situation at all. That over the course of the last week, that this is something that's been developing since probably about last Thursday, in terms of the don't come to practice, stay home. They took the trip out to Montreal on Friday. They played the game on Saturday. They've been on the bye week this whole week. Now we're at the point where the All-Star game is tonight. Team's going to practice again tomorrow, and there's no news about Dale Weiss or any takers or anything like that. I do think that Dale Weiss will be moved eventually somewhere over the course of the next month for sure, just because you don't go this far with this and not end up moving the player in some capacity. But it's just a strange situation all the way around.
So I got to ask you about Carter Hart, because I've been using the term incredulous the last few days, and that is, look, I understand the theory, right? You loan him to Lehigh Valley, you get him some extra reps, blah, blah, blah. I get it. But at some point, this kid has shown himself to be an NHL-level goaltender. All right, he's not a guy that I really want to see getting bounced up and down. I think that if everybody else is off, he should have off too, Kevin. And I don't understand, why it was so important for them to get him more playing time. If he's your goalie of the future, if he is going to be everything we expect him to be, then let him just stay at the NHL level and rest up and be ready for the stretch run.
I see the point in that. And I also, one thing I would agree with in terms of all that is I thought for sure that if he was going to get playing time with the Phantoms over this stretch, that it would have been yesterday, just because it was the first game of a 2-game weekend for them. It was a home game. It's kind of like almost like a treat for the fans of Allentown to come out, watch Carter Hart play a game, and at that point, send him off, and it's like a ride off into the sunset for him. He's off to the NHL. You won't see him in the minors again, probably, unless they make a playoff run. of which I think then there's merit to that for sure. After the Flyers season is over, go back down, play in the AHL playoffs, and get some valuable experience in the toughest form of competition, which is a playoff schedule. Aside from that, I don't really see the point of it either. You run the risk of injury, and there was a lot of rumors floating around because the idea was that after getting Carter Hart back on the Phantoms made a roster move and called up a goalie from Reading who actually started last night's game. The belief is that there was an injury to Alex Lyon that was the result of that move, but for a few hours there was a wonder if something had happened and what if it was to Carter Hart, and that sent people even crazier than before, because you did run the risk of putting him into a game, and what if something happens? He's been your most consistent goalie at the NHL level, let alone the AHL level at this point. So you don't want to run that risk either. This isn't the same situation for any other goalie in the league. He is 20. He does have the free options. They don't have to put him through waivers to do this. So you understand the ease of the move, but you also have to understand the risks. And the risk is, what if this kid gets hurt trying to play in one tune-up game when you could use him 3 times next week? That's the risk.
Yeah, and I'm not, when I make this analogy, I'm not saying he is these goaltenders, but you go back and look at the early part of a guy like Martin Brodor's career, or a Marc-Andre Fleury, or a Patrick Waugh. Those teams just kept those guys at the NHL level full time, outside of like injury, having to go down for like some work. And I think those guys turned out pretty well. I'm just not a fan of this messing around with where a guy is on the roster and up and down, up and down. I feel like if he can play, which he has shown he's really good, just let him stay here and don't mess with everybody.
The interesting thing about the situation is I think the one person who doesn't need any explanation for it is Carter Hart himself. I think he'll accept whatever the team decides to do with him. But you run the risk of sending a lot of mixed signals to anybody else below management within the organization. The fans for sure, because the fan base has come to see this kid play, see that he can handle the NHL level. They absolutely love him at home games. He could make a routine save, and he's getting massive cheers.
He's a star.
A blessing for and it's been a blessing for the organization because they're actually drawing more attention to themselves. They had really lost the attention of the fan base for a good chunk of the year, and then they made this decision. And I think it was kind of interesting because the decision to bring Carter Hart up, coupled with the firing of Dave Haxtell, which was something else the fan base was very hard on and wanted to see happen, and so you couple those two moves together, and it was kind of like a new awakening. Okay, maybe things are going to get better in the future. It might not save this season, but it drew interest. And the more they've played Carter Hart and the more that he has had success, the more that it's drawing people down. The other mixed signal you could send with this is you're sending a mixed signal to the players as well, because the players have had more of a willingness to sell out for Carter Hart in the third period. They block a lot of shots. They're trying to get in the way. The penalty killing has been more aggressive in front of Carter Hart. So he's changed the way that this team plays, even though he doesn't have any involvement in anything else that happens on the ice other than playing goal and stopping shots. He's helping influence the way the rest of the team plays a little bit, just because I think everybody on that team wants to see him succeed, and he's kept them in enough games, even in 12 starts, that have shown the rest of the team, maybe we should start playing in front of him. Maybe we should start giving him a little something. And you look at, I think the Minnesota game last Monday was a great example of that. He doesn't get off to the best start in goal. He lets in 2 early goals that, for all intents and purposes, maybe, the one was on a deflection, but he'll probably tell you he should have stopped it. But the team comes back and scores 7 goals that night. It doesn't matter that he let in 4, even while making 34 saves, which is still impressive. It's a matter of the way the team plays. And if you keep this kid down in the minor leagues for the rest of this season with the way that he's played in just these short 12 games here, I think you send a completely wrong message to the rest of the team about what the next month and beyond is going to be. It sends the message that get ready for a lot of losses. It's almost like going into tank mode, and teams don't do that in the NHL. It's not like some other sports where you're able to do that a little bit. Teams don't do that, and to tell these athletes that we're not trying, then I think that's a big mixed signal for what this kid has done over the course of 12 games.
Yeah, and also you mentioned the fans. Look, at the end of the day, the team needs to put on a good product to keep the fans coming out. I haven't been in the building this year, but when I watch the games on TV, and you can explain this to me a little bit better than the audience, through the TV, through the radio, I hear a different energy in that Flyers building when Carter Hart is in goal versus anybody else being in goal. And I think the organization needs to recognize the fact that this kid is what everybody wants. And sometimes, Kevin, for lack of a better term, you got to give the fans what they want. Look what the Sixers are doing. They're sitting Embiid in a road game on a Saturday. Now, yeah, it stinks for the fans in Denver who maybe wanted to see Embiid, but the Sixers are saying, look, we're not sitting Embiid for any of our home games because the fans want to see Embiid, but if he's going to get a day rest, it's going to be on the road. I think the Flyers could maybe take a cue from the Sixers and say, look, the fans want to see Carter Hart. We're going to give them all the Carter Hart they can get.
Yeah, no question. I mean, his debut was something special to begin with, not only for his performance, but from introductions. He was a star before he even took the ice in the fans' eyes, just because of how highly touted he was and the potential he has. And then you look at what he's done over the course of the game since, and there was this realization after the win against Boston, the 4-3 win, where he makes 39 saves, which was a career high for him in his young career. And you look at the way the thing that you started thinking about after that game was he just stole them a win. And then same thing again with the Saturday game in Montreal. That wasn't even a home game, but you're going, he just stole them a win, essentially. The first two periods were something completely different. The Flyers got outshot in Montreal in the first period 12-1 and came out of it scoreless. And that was largely in part to Carter Hart. And then they go on to win that game 5-2 once they get the offense rolling in the last two periods. So you look at what Carter Hart has done for the energy in the building and everything like that. I think there's people who also go in, it changes expectations. And it's kind of hard to believe that you're saying this about a 20-year-old as compared to these veteran goalies who have tried to play for the Flyers this season. It's 6 different goalies in total outside of Carter Hart.
I love how you say they tried to play goalie.
Well, when you stack them up next to Carter Hart, there's almost no comparison.
I know.
You've got veteran goalies with save percentages that are less than 85%.
Yep.
And Carter Hart's 20 years old, no experience in the NHL, very little professional experience too. He had all of 2 months to prepare for his NHL debut by playing in the pros, and he's got a .920 save percentage, and his goals against average is second on the team. And essentially, he's the most veteran goalies this season in terms of games played. He's played 12 games. The only guy with more is Brian Elliott, who played 14 and got 13 starts. If Carter Hart's in goal on Monday, which he should be, then he's matched the team lead in games started in goal, and that's the thing. So I think that there's a different vibe as soon as you put somebody else in goal. Michael Neuvirth just doesn't get any support like that anymore because I think more people are waiting for him to be injured again than waiting for him to make the big save. And he's been good at times when he's played, but more people know him for the injury history than they do the saves that he made in certain games or whatever. And same thing with Brian Elliott. Brian Elliott had a good, consistent run for several weeks last season, but right now people know him more for being on IR than they do playing goal. And these other prospects that are available, Alex Lyon hasn't succeeded this way. Anthony Stolarz has had a few moments and had some games where he's been great, but he's had some games where he hasn't been either, and it's too inconsistent for people. So to see Carter Hart come up, and the thing I think that's interesting about Carter Hart is to look at him play and have that one game in Carolina where he gives up 3 goals on 10 shots, and that was clearly just a night where he didn't have it. But to come back from that, play well against a good team against Calgary in his next start, get the hard luck overtime loss because of a couple of defensive breakdowns in front of him that left chances that he couldn't really stop. He played a tremendous game in Florida shortly after the holiday break and got hit with a 2-1 loss because of 2 chances that he was never going to stop because of defensive breakdowns. And he's taking losses by playing well as opposed to taking losses by not playing well. And he's bounced back from that one bad start to put together. I mean, the team has won 4 of their last 5, and Carter Hart started all 5. And that kind of tells you where this team is going potentially with Carter Hart. It's kind of weird to say, they've got a goaltender now, and they just need to figure out the rest of the pieces.
Yeah. Hey, you got to start somewhere. At least they got the goaltender, like you said. Kevin, I really appreciate your time on a Saturday. I know it's a Flyers bye week, but I'm just juicing for more Carter Hart. I know the Flyers are coming back on Monday, I'm sure we'll be in touch as the trade deadline gets closer. So thanks again for joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline today.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.